They say there was a city where gold shone brighter than the sun, and the sound of harps echoed between ivory columns, a place where kings bathed their robes in wine and women were crowned with perfumes brought from distant lands. Samaria, the jewel of northern Israel, born of pride, fueled by arrogance, sustained on a ground that trembled before its own glory. But behind the palaces and sumptuous altars lay a secret that not even the prophets dared speak aloud. For the walls of Samaria were not built with stones alone, but with sacrifices, oaths, and silent pacts. While the people celebrated their feasts, the heavens watched in silence, awaiting the moment when fire would fall upon the pride of men. And when it finally came, it came with divine fury. The same wind that once blew incense and music now brought ashes and screams. Samaria, the beautiful, the powerful, the untouchable, became ruin and warning, an eternal scar on the geography of faith. But what few know is that Samaria's end wasn't just a punishment. There are hidden records, erased texts, and broken inscriptions that suggest something darker, a fire that came not just from heaven, but from the depths. Something awakened beneath those walls before they crumbled. An ancient pact, sealed by kings and priests, may have been the true reason for its destruction. And they say this pact still echoes, that the ruins of Samaria hold something that never died. Pride may have been the disguise, but what truly burned there was something much older than Israel itself. By the end of this video, you will understand why Samaria fell not just to divine wrath, but to something that heaven itself feared to confront. If the fire of Samaria still breathes in these words, may your like be the next spark. Subscribe and enter with me into the shadows of the past. In the heart of the ancient northern kingdom, Samaria stood as a challenge to eternity itself. Its walls were not mere stones upon stones, but monuments to the human ego. King Omri, its founder, purchased the hill and planted there the symbol of a power he believed to be eternal. Every block of marble, every corridor bathed in gold, reflected the same thought. We are greater than Judah. We are greater than God. The columns were so tall they seemed to touch the sky, and the squares so wide that the sound of celebrations echoed like thunder. The people, blinded by abundance, believed that divine favor was measured by the amount of wine at banquets and the thickness of the imported linen curtains. But the prophets whispered in the street corners, and few dared listen. Amos, Hosea, Elijah, voices that spoke of a coming fire, of a storm already moving beyond the horizon. With each act of idolatry, with each altar erected to Baal, the ground beneath Samaria grew hotter, as if hell breathed beneath its foundations. Priests preached peace while sacrificing innocents, and kings erected temples to foreign gods while proclaiming their service to the God of Israel. The contrast was stark. While the golden altars gleamed in the sun, the city's lower streets smelled of blood and ash. And then came Jezebel, the queen who turned Samaria into a stage for witchcraft and seduction. Her beauty was as powerful as her venom. Men bowed not out of devotion, but out of desire. She ruled not with the sword, but with her gaze, and through it, she dragged an entire nation into idolatry. The pillars of Baal's temples rose beside the Lord's altars, and the people mistook faith for pleasure, power for salvation. Jezebel did not destroy Samaria. She merely revealed it, showed it what it always was, an empire of vanity masquerading as devotion. And as the incense rose, something invisible descended. The clouds grew denser, the air heavier. There was something unearthly in the atmosphere, a dark expectation, a foreboding that even the birds seemed to sense. Samaria had become the mirror of human pride, and the reflection was already beginning to distort. For every kingdom that defies heaven sooner or later learns that fire doesn't just come down to warm, it also purifies. And in the silence between one thunder and another, destiny began to move. Some say that beneath the remains of the palaces, echoes of laughter and interrupted chants can still be heard. Perhaps they aren't ghosts. Perhaps they are memories slowly burning. What would you do if you knew that the beauty you so admire was built on a sin that time itself tried to hide? As the years became centuries and the wind eroded the brilliance of the crowns, Samaria grew in power and ruin like a flower blooming over the abyss. On the outside, its palaces were gilded, but inside, they hid chambers that never saw the light. There were subterranean altars, where the silence was broken only by chants in forgotten languages, and where blood was used not as a symbol, but as currency. Ancient scribes spoke of a pact sealed with entities that promised fertility, victory, and eternal beauty. No one dared record the names invoked in these ceremonies. All that was known was that at nightfall, the air of Samaria grew heavy, and the dogs howled as if sensing presences that human eyes could not bear. The people believed the city prospered through blessing, but few knew that every bountiful harvest, every precious stone mined from the valley, came at a price paid in secret by the priests themselves. Baal's sacred fire burned in temples that reeked of incense and fear. And as the gold accumulated, the city's soul rotted. Jezebel, seated on her throne, watched the prophets die one by one and smiled, because she knew that, behind their hatred for her, there was also fascination. No one dared admit it, but there was something divinely seductive in her blasphemy. The story we know is but a shadow of what really happened. It is said that beneath the palace's foundations lay a room made of black stone, where King Ahab himself made secret offerings. In this room were inscriptions that archaeologists have never deciphered, drawings of inverted stars, flaming eyes, and symbols that seemed alive when the lamplight touched them. When Samaria fell, everything was buried, but some manuscripts have preserved a fragment of this truth. The fire came not only from above, but also from below. The very soil that had supported the palaces now burned from within, and it is said that the earth opened, swallowing entire sections of the city. What lay on the horizon was not just destruction, but purification. The wind carried the smell of sulfur and broken promises. Women fled with their children, men cried out for the gods who had abandoned them, and the heavens, sat in silence. And so, the pride that once shone like gold now turned to coal. Samaria didn't fall overnight. It was slowly consumed, like a living sacrifice before a cosmic altar. And in the end, when everything turned to ash, they say a final cry echoed among the hills. Not human, not earthly, something that shouldn't exist in this world. What if that scream wasn't the end, but the beginning of something that still awakens in the ruins? Perhaps the fire that destroyed Samaria never went out. Perhaps it's just waiting for the right moment to reignite. Sometimes ashes don't tell the end of a story. They just announce that it still breathes. When the last prophet was silenced and the trumpets ceased, the heavens seemed to wait. For days, nothing moved over Samaria. The wind stagnated, the birds disappeared, and even the sound of the fountains fell silent. It was as if the universe itself held its breath before the final blow. Then came twilight, not an ordinary sunset, but a fiery flash that stained the horizon with blood. The air trembled. The distant hills began to creak as if they were alive. And from above, a light opened like a wound in the vault of heaven. Those who looked went mad. Others fell to their knees, believing they saw angels. But what descended was not light, it was judgment. The fire reached the temple first. The columns shattered like bones, the gold melted and ran down the stairs like the tears of a wounded god. It is said that Jezebel herself, upon seeing the blaze, laughed, not out of courage, but because she recognized something familiar in it. It was the same fire she had once summoned, the same power she believed she controlled. But this time, she was not the one commanding the flames. It was as if everything hidden cried out for release. The ground exploded beneath men's feet, and the foundations of the palaces revealed what should never have been seen. The black stone room, still burning, still pulsing, as if a subterranean force rose to claim what was its own. The surviving scribes wrote that the fire came from two places at once, from heaven and from earth, and that both met in the heart of Samaria, consuming the air, the stone, and the blood. What happened in that instant was more than destruction. It was an invisible war between the divine and the abyssal. And between these forces, the city disappeared. The fire raged for days. When it finally died down, nothing remained but smoldering ruins and a silence that seemed eternal. But they say that beneath the ashes, there is still heat, that those who walk over the ruins of Samaria at night feel the ground throb, as if something still breathes down there. Some shepherds report hearing faint chants, as if female voices wailing among the stones. Others say they see lights dancing on the hills like embers that refuse to go out. Samaria was consumed but not destroyed, because what is born of pride does not die, it only changes form. Divine fire cleansed what was visible, but what was hidden learned to hide better. And perhaps that is why even today the wind that passes through the ruins sounds like an ancient whisper, not of regret, but of promise. Perhaps Samaria's true punishment was not its fall, but the fact that it still exists, unseen, in every empire that repeats the same sins. For every time power rises above pride, the fire awakens again, and when that fire returns, you will know it by the smell of burning gold and the sound of voices that have never been silenced. There are echoes that time does not erase, it only postpones. And some hearing these echoes will understand that Samaria never left. She simply awaits the next throne to challenge heaven. Centuries passed, and the wind began to blow over what remained of Samaria. Travelers crossing the hills of Samaria at dusk spoke of a strange sensation, a mixture of awe and fear, as if the land still held memories of a time when human pride tried to compete with the brilliance of the divine. The ruins, covered in dust and silence, became a forgotten altar, and the few who dared explore them claimed to hear footsteps behind them, even when they were alone. The echo of ancient processions still seemed to resonate among the cracked stones, as if the ghosts of kings and priestesses refused to depart. Archaeologists digging on the hill of Shomron, where Samaria was built, found inscriptions burned into the underground walls, not in Hebrew or Aramaic, but in an unknown language, with curved lines and symbols resembling moving flames. One of them, before mysteriously disappearing, reportedly wrote in his diary that the stones seemed alive, emitting heat even in the shade. Another reported hearing distant chanting coming from the depths, as if someone or something was still celebrating. But when they tried to record the sound, nothing appeared. Most disturbingly, the ruins of Samaria seem to resist the passage of time. While neighboring cities have been swallowed by the desert, here the ground remains exposed, bare, as if refusing to be covered again. Residents of nearby villages say that no plants grow in certain areas. The soil is hot, arid, and unpredictable. When it rains, steam rises like smoke, and some claim to see faces briefly forming in the mists. An old shepherd before his death recounted that one night he saw a woman in a dark robe walking among the rocks. She had no face, only a veil that moved against the wind, and wherever she passed, the air smelled of incense and sulfur. Perhaps what burned in Samaria wasn't just stone and wood. Perhaps it was an idea, the human dream of equaling the gods, the same pride that destroyed empires, that built towers and palaces, and that still pulses within us. Because what the ancients called fire from heaven we call ambition. What they called idolatry we call vanity. And deep down there is no difference. What if Samaria's punishment was more than destruction? If it was a mirror left for future generations? Perhaps by contemplating its ruins, man sees the reflection of his own destiny. For the fire that consumed Samaria never ceased to exist. It merely changed its name, its form, its face. And when the wind blows over those burned stones, some swear they hear the same. Murmur, pride is the easiest temple to build and the hardest to tear down. Who would dare now walk on this ground without looking up at the sky? Some say Samaria has disappeared forever, but the ruins speak differently. The stones, when touched, vibrate as if they hold a living memory, an echo of fire, a whisper of what was never fully extinguished. For pride does not die with the body. It is reborn in other forms, in other cities, with other names. The same spirit that built palaces upon. Arrogance still breathes in the corridors of power, in the gleaming domes of the new Samarias of the modern world. Man changes his clothes, his language, his altar, but the God he worships is the same, the reflection of his own face. And when we look back at that city that defied heaven, perhaps we see a warning hidden in plain sight. For the destruction of Samaria was not just ancient history, it was a reminder that everything built on vanity is doomed to fall. The fire that came from above and from the depth still circulates throughout the world, disguised as progress, wealth, and glory. It ignites every time man believes he can manipulate the divine, control destiny, and dominate the invisible. The prophets warned, whoever builds on pride builds on ashes, but stubborn man continues to pile stone upon stone, dream upon sin, as if time were forgotten. Samaria was the first mirror, but not the last. Every empire that dared to think itself eternal met the same end. Rome, Babylon, Tyre, and even modern kingdoms with their temples of glass and artificial light all repeat the same mistake, with a new mask, with the same result. Some scholars claim the fire of Samaria was merely metaphorical, others that it was literal, but perhaps both are wrong. Perhaps fire has no form, only will, and this will still moves among us, invisible yet hungry, waiting for the moment when humanity will once again believe itself to be greater than the heavens. When that happens, the flames will come, not from lightning or eruptions, but from within the human heart, where pride lurks like an ancient ember. The ruins of Samaria still stand, half swallowed by the earth, half preserved by fear. The wind blows through the cracks and sounds like an inverted prayer. The sun illuminates them but never warms them, and at night they say the city glows for a moment, a faint, reddish glow, as if fire still breathes beneath the stones. Perhaps it's just an illusion, or perhaps hell never left the place where it began, and if heaven came down to consume Samaria, perhaps it was less a punishment and more a warning, because the real hell is not the fire that destroys, but the pride that kindles it. And the most disturbing thing of all is to realize that in each new tower erected by humanity, in each city that proclaims itself eternal, the name of Samaria seems to whisper among the foundations, a reminder that heaven may forgive, but never forgets. There are stories that time tries to bury, but the earth refuses. Samaria is one of them, a mirror of fire and dust, where man saw his own reflection and was lost. And perhaps as you look at the world today, you will realize Samaria's shine never dimmed. It simply changed address. For centuries, Samaria was believed to be merely a symbol of human fall, a myth, a warning etched in scripture to fuel fear and faith. But recent excavations have begun to reveal something many theologians would rather never have known. Beneath the layers of ash and stone, archaeologists have discovered structures that don't fit with the architecture of the Israelite period. Spiral tunnels, symbols carved with mathematical precision, and scorch marks that couldn't have been the result of simple human destruction. There are reports, hidden in academic publications, of inscriptions describing doors of light and shadow, and of rituals that invoked celestial entities through sacred fire. What was believed to be divine punishment may have been a consequence. Something answered Samaria's call, something that belonged neither to heaven nor earth. And when the fire descended, it may have been less a punishment and more a containment. The city may not have been destroyed simply for defying the Almighty, but for opening what should never have been opened. Human pride, touching the domain of the divine, ignited a force that even the angels feared. The very ground where Samaria rests seems to refuse rest. The sand shifts, the hills whisper, and the wind blows hotly, a living reminder of what was once contained there. There's a passage from a manuscript found near the ruins, written in a lost language, translated with difficulty. It says, "The stars heard, the fire responded, and the gates were sealed in flesh and stone." If true, this text would change how we understand the episode, because it suggests that the fire that consumed Samaria came not just to destroy, but to seal something, an ancient force, perhaps predating humanity itself, preserved beneath the ashes of pride. And when modern man builds his towers and machines, he may not even realize that he is repeating Samaria's gesture, touching once again the veil that separates the human from the eternal. Each time a civilization decides to play God, the same invisible heat pulsates beneath the earth. Samaria may have been just the first seal to break, and the other cities, our cities, are merely the continuation of a story that time insists on rewriting. There are truths that are not fully revealed because man could not bear to hear them. Samaria was consumed by fire, yes, but what burned there was not just stone, it was knowledge, and what was sealed beneath its ruins may one day awaken again. And if this awakening has already begun, where will the fire reignite first? They say there are places on earth where time bends, where history doesn't end, it just rests. Samaria is one of those places. Those who approach its ruins at dusk feel something different. In the air, a soft hum, as if the earth itself were murmuring an ancient language. The wind doesn't blow in normal directions. It swirls, circles, dances around the hills, as if guarding something. And there are reports from excavators, soldiers, and shepherds that on certain nights the horizon turns an impossible red, and small lights rise from the ground like live coals, disappearing before dawn. These reports were ignored for centuries, until modern scientists decided to study the phenomenon. Energy readings from Samaria's subsurface revealed something unusual, a constant thermal emission coming from a point deep below, far below the known ruins. No fire should last for millennia, but there, something remains burning, a heat with no apparent source, an echo of the same fire that once consumed the city. Some believe that what burns is not physical, but spiritual, as if Samaria's guilt, pride, and pact have become part of the soil, transforming the land into a living reliquary of human fall. And this is where the mystery deepens. During secret excavations conducted in the 20th century, a team found fragments of molten glass, not natural glass, but material melted by intense heat, similar to that found at nuclear blast sites. This, in a city destroyed thousands of years before the invention of modern fire. No scientific explanation has sufficed, and perhaps it doesn't need to be, because there's something more coherent and more terrifying in admitting that Samaria was touched by something that doesn't belong on Earth. Some ancient Aramaic texts speak of fiery angels descending upon rebellious cities, but the words used there, seraphim, the burning ones, do not describe punishment, but rather containment. Guardians who burned not out of anger but out of duty. Perhaps Samaria was the scene of an invisible battle between light and darkness, and the fire was the seal that kept the abyss from opening completely. Today, tourism in the hills is limited. Authorities say it's for historical preservation. But residents claim to hear metallic noises underground, as if chains were dragging something trapped deep within. And when the wind blows too hard, it brings with it a muffled sound, similar to breathing. A missing archaeologist described in his final notes, "The heat comes from within, as if the city still had a beating heart." Perhaps Samaria never died. Perhaps it is merely sleeping, waiting for a new human pride to call it back. Because the fire that descended from heaven did not destroy everything. A spark remained, and this spark, invisible, silent, is perhaps spreading again through cities, through empires, through souls. And when this flame is fully awakened, fire won't need to fall from the sky. It will be enough to look around. The same radiance that consumed Samaria already lives in the eyes of those who believe they are greater than God. There is an ancient prophecy, nearly erased from Scripture, that mentions that the fire of Samaria would return in a generation that would exchange altars of stone for temples of glass, a generation that would have no need of gods because it would have already made one of its own. The sages who dared interpret this fragment were ridiculed, but what we see today seems to fulfill every forgotten word. Modern, artificially lit cities are mirrors of the same brilliance that preceded the fall. Steel towers reflect the same desire to touch the sky, to dominate what is above, to defy the Creator himself. The world has become a new Samaria. The voices that once echoed in temples now resound on screens, and incense has been replaced by the scent of ambition and power. Faith hasn't disappeared, it's simply changed its name. And what was invoked millennia ago, the fire that slumbered beneath the earth, begins to awaken within the human heart. The ancient walls may have fallen, but the spirit that built them has found a new home, invisible, technological, silent. There are signs, natural disasters in places where the ground has never trembled, storms that seem to carry something other than electricity, unexplained light phenomena appearing over ancient ruins. Scholars call it coincidence, but the monks of the older orders murmur another word, return. They say the same fire that consumed Samaria is returning, not to destroy a city, but to judge an age, and perhaps judgment has already begun. Man, blinded by his own wisdom, has once again built his palaces on pride. He believes he has tamed the fire, the same mistake Jezebel made when she thought she could control the divine. But the fire never belonged to anyone. It watches, patient, silent, waiting for the right moment to reignite. Because the fire of Samaria was not just destruction, it was consciousness. It was the reflection of human pride itself, the reminder that everything born of ego ends in ashes. Some claim the heat in the ruins has increased in recent years. Others say voices are recorded underground in low-frequency sounds, like a reverse chant. Coincidence, they say. But those who know history know fire doesn't forget, it just sleeps. And every time the world swells with pride, it awakens a little more. Samaria was the first altar. The modern world is the second. And if there's one thing heaven has taught earth, it's that fire always returns to the place from which it was cast. The difference is that now it doesn't need to descend. It's already here. Maybe the question is no longer when the fire will return, but if there will still be something pure enough to resist it. And as men continue to build their kingdoms of vanity, the ruins of Samaria shine again in the moonlight, reminding the world that pride has an expiration date and fire a perfect memory. The ruins of Samaria don't just belong to the past, they are a mirror the present avoids looking at. Every civilization, in its eagerness for progress and glory, builds the same kind of hill, repeats the same gesture, utters the same words that condemned that forgotten city. We are greater than we were, we are above the sky, and so the fire returns, not as a visible blaze, but as a silent fever, the fever of collective vanity. Humanity has learned to clothe pride with nobler names: innovation, dominion, conquest. But the fire recognizes its essence, and pride remains its fuel. In the deserts of Israel, the dunes still change shape with each season, revealing for brief moments fragments of columns, pieces of vases, and nearly faded inscriptions. Each discovery rekindles fascination and fear. Because the more one digs, the clearer the feeling becomes that something there doesn't sleep, it merely watches. Some scholars claim that the residual heat in the ruins is not physical, but energetic, a kind of continuous vibration, the echo of a cosmic event. Others, more mystical, say that the fire of Samaria was conscious, a divine entity that manifested itself to devour human pride, and that ever since has roamed the world in search of new thrones to consume. Perhaps this is why great empires crumble overnight, why history repeats itself with cruel precision. It's not chance, it's fire finding a new home. With each tower that touches the sky, with each altar erected to vanity, the spark awakens a little more. And the world, distracted by its own technology, doesn't even notice the smell of ash in the air. Fire is patient. It waits silently for the moment when man will once again believe he can rule the invisible. And then, when the last echo of humility falls silent, modern walls will crumble in the same way, not with explosions but with silence. For the most terrible punishment is the one that comes without warning, when brilliance itself becomes the instrument of destruction. Samaria taught that human power is a brief flame trying to imitate the sun, and every radiance that does not come from above ends up consumed by itself. What modern man still doesn't understand is that fire was never the enemy. The enemy is the mirror, and when the reflection starts to burn, it will be too late to look away. Some secrets never fade, they merely change form. Samaria was destroyed by fire, but what it represented continues to breathe in the shadows of modern civilization. The pride that built its palaces now hides in the illuminated screens, in the algorithms that decide what is true, in the voices that proclaim themselves gods of their own creation. The same pride that set the heavens ablaze over Israel now burns in laboratories, digital temples, and invisible thrones, and the fire, patient as ever, watches, ready to rise again. Ancient texts called this the cycle of fire, not a punishment, but a reminder. Every time man tries to recreate the divine in his own image, the same heat returns. It is the response of the earth, of time, of the invisible itself. When pride reaches its peak, fire finds a breach, a crack in the wall of vanity, and breaks through. Sometimes it comes in the form of disaster, other times as revelation, and perhaps in the ruins of Samaria lies buried not only the past but the future, the destiny of every civilization that dares to repeat its history. They say that under certain moons, when the wind blows from the east and the desert falls silent, the stones of Samaria glow as if fire were breathing within them again. Some claim to hear voices, sometimes chants, and there are those who swear they saw a woman dressed in a black veil among the broken columns, walking, without leaving a footprint. Some call her a memory, others a curse, but perhaps she is the symbol of what Samaria left in the world, the eternal temptation to touch the heavens with hands of clay. What was consumed was not the city, but the boundary between the sacred and the profane. And ever since, mankind has been trying to rebuild it, unaware that the fire is not outside, it is within. Jezebel, Ahab, Omri, ancient names for a new sin, because the true throne of Samaria was never destroyed. It was transferred to the hearts of those who still believe they can overcome the Creator himself. The silence that blankets the ruins is not oblivion, it is waiting. A silence that precedes the sound of modern walls cracking, of voices shouting again, of fire reigniting in cities that thought they were safe. Samaria fell, yes, but its history is the mirror that reflects the end of all empires that love their own image too much. And perhaps, when the fire returns, it will not come to destroy, but to reveal. Because the real hell was never the punishment, it was the mirror, and in it man will see the face of Samaria and his own. Before silence again covers what's left of the ruins, leave your like someone fanning an ancient ember. Subscribe, because some secrets are never repeated, only revealed once, and when the next seal breaks, you'll want to be here to see the fire rekindle.